This Georgia Department of Education screencast is intended to provide teachers of 5th grade social studies with content knowledge to aid in the teaching of the Georgia Standards of Excellence. In this screencast, we will be looking at Economic Standards SS5E2 and SS5E3 in regards to how banks obtain money from the other three sectors of the U.S. economy by offering checking and savings accounts, which they in turn use to provide loans for consumers, businesses, and the government. We will also be looking at Standard SS5H3 and how the prosperity of the 1920s led people who did not fully understand these interactions to make unwise investment decisions that ultimately led to the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed it. The 10 years that make up the 1920s, from the end of World War I in 1919 to the stock market crash in October of 1929, were a time of great economic prosperity in the United States. With the rise of industry and the factories that went along with that, jobs were plentiful, and with new production techniques and the use of assembly lines to increase the supply of products, prices came down, and many goods that had been considered luxury items, like the automobile, were now affordable for the average American family. We call such a period of high productivity, high wages, high demand, and high consumerism, or sales, an economic boom, and the 20s were really booming, so much so that they became known as the Roaring Twenties. In America life was good, and you may be familiar with the expression, all good things must come to an end. Well, the economic boom of the 20s didn't just come to an end. They went down in a fiery crash unlike anything we had ever seen before. However, for your students to understand how such a thing could occur, we will need to build a little background knowledge of how the four sectors of the economy interact with each other, at least as it relates to investments, savings, loans, and the stock market. By now your students will have learned about some of the great industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and Henry Ford, or inventors like the Wright brothers, Alexander Graham Bell, and Thomas Edison. These men are called entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is someone who has an idea for a product or service and decides to take on the risk of going into business to make and sell that good or service. The risk is that if people don't want to buy that good or service as much as the entrepreneur thought they could lose the time and money it took to get the business going. The benefit is that if the good or service is popular and people are willing to buy it, the entrepreneur stands to make a lot of money. Now, many entrepreneurs or inventors start out small, using their own money to get their idea going. Here is where Henry Ford started building the precursor to the Model T. Soon, however, they will need to be able to produce enough of their products to sell to a lot of people, and that needs money. Money for factories, stores, employees, equipment, materials, and so forth. More money than most people have, and so they get a loan. Now here is where it can get confusing, especially for young children. Children think of a loan as something someone does just to be nice, and they see charging people for loans as being greedy. But we must help them see a bank as a business, and the people who work there or own the bank have families that they need to feed and take care of, and so banks must make money too, just like a store. But banks don't have a tangible product, unless you count money as a product, which for them it is. So banks loan business and people and even the government money, but they charge people money to do that. That charge is called interest. The more you borrow, and the longer you borrow it for, the more money or interest you have to pay on top of repaying the money you borrow. So where do banks get this money that they loan out from? Students may have the misconception that banks make, meaning print, not earn, money, and they can just print as much of it as they need. So you may need to clear that up. Banks get money from households, businesses, and the government in the form of checking and savings accounts, as well as repaid loans. That is why banks will offer free checking and savings accounts, and even offer to pay you a little interest, because the money in those checking and savings accounts doesn't just sit in a vault. It is being used to earn money for the bank in the form of loans to other people that will earn the bank interest. So how does the bank do this? It's your money, right? How do they use it to give loans to others? Well, the bank knows that while one of its customers may come in and withdraw all of their money from the bank at a given time, not everyone will. And so they keep enough money on hand in the vault to cover what they think people may withdraw and a good bit extra, just in case. but the rest of the money from all of the accounts combined goes back out of the bank in the form of loans. Now that works just great, so long as everybody that has an account doesn't decide to come and get all of their money out at the same time, because the bank doesn't have it. It's out doing work for the bank, and surely that would never happen anyway. Now, banks aren't the only ones that can make money by loaning some money to entrepreneurs. Households or individual people, and even businesses can loan, or invest as it is called, in an entrepreneur's business. They do this by buying stock in a company on the stock market. A stock is basically a paper saying you bought a tiny portion or share of a company. You own a little bit of that risk too. If the business fails, then you lose the money you invested. If the business is successful, you earn a little bit of the profits. If a business is doing well, the price to own a little share of it gets higher, and if it is doing poorly, the price gets lower. Investors can actually sell their portions or shares to other people. So I could buy a share of a business for, say, $1, and as the business is doing well, the price of that share goes up to $2. I can turn around and sell the share I paid $1 for to someone else for $2, and I just made $1 on my investment. The problem is, it can be hard to predict how much the price of a stock will go up or down. So if I buy my stock at $1, and then the price goes down to 50 cents, if I sell my stock now, I lose money. I could wait to see if the price will go back up, but maybe it will keep going down, and the business will close, and I lose everything. Well, back to the Roaring '20s. Business was doing great, and people saw other people making lots of money by investing in the stock market, and they wanted a piece of the action. But the thing is, businesses can only grow so much. Eventually, most everyone has bought your product or service, and sales will slow. All of that rapid growth in the '20s encouraged a lot of people to invest in stocks that didn't really understand how it all worked, and they invested money they really couldn't afford to lose if things went bad, because, well, they just never really thought things would go bad. So towards the end of 1929, many businesses had grown about as much as they could, and just couldn't grow anymore. The issue is really much more complex than this, but for 5th grade, this will have to suffice. As a result, their stocks started losing a bit of value. This is normal, and experienced investors will ride it out. But at this time, the stock market had a lot of inexperienced investors who couldn't afford to lose this money, and so they started selling their stocks. As stocks started getting sold, the value of them went down even more. And as the value went down, more people started worrying that they were going to lose their money and started selling too. This set off a chain reaction of people panicking and selling, which sent the prices of stocks spiraling downward out of control, resulting in the great stock market crash on Tuesday, October 29, 1929, a day that became known as Black Tuesday. Now remember that banks make money by loaning it to businesses and people. Well, as the stock market crashed, businesses and people lost a lot of money, and by extension, so did the banks. You may also remember that banks are just like a business whose product is money, and as banks lost money, some of them went out of business. So what happened to the money people had in their checking and savings accounts when the bank went out of business? Well, if it was a private bank, which 2/3 of them were at this time, you lost that money. As people saw banks closing and other people losing the money they had in those banks, they started to worry it could happen to them and decided to get their money out of the banks. This is called a bank run, or a run on the bank. As we saw earlier, however, banks don't keep all of the money in the bank. They invest it in loans. So when most of their customers came to withdraw all of their money, the banks didn't have it, and so people couldn't get their money from the bank, which only served to fuel the panic even more, which in turn caused even more banks to fail. All of these cascading economic events, coupled with a great drought in the Midwestern farmlands, brought the United States and the rest of the world into a time of great poverty and unemployment that became known as the Great Depression. With this foundational knowledge about how the 4 sectors of the U.S. economy interact with each other as it relates to investments, savings, loans, and the stock market, and how these interactions led to the stock market crash of 1929, Your students will be able to better understand the Great Depression and its aftershocks. But we will have to save that for another screencast. That's all for now. We'll see you next time. Here are some helpful resources that provide more information, as well as the works used in the creation of this screencast.